I've been thinking about the ethics of nudging because I'm adding an ethics general education requirement to my behavioral economics course. And in doing this, I'm thinking about my amazing altruistic students who want to do wonderful things for the world. So I did a thought experiment thinking about sort of perfect people being the ones doing the nudging. Now, I'm not saying my students are perfect. I believe every person is good and evil and every person has flaws. That's not what I'm saying. But when I did this thought experiment, I realized that I think there is a tragedy of the commons with nudging. So I want to explain that in the sense of, I think even if the best possible people with the best intentions do the nudging, we could end up in a really bad situation. So here's the setup. We have a bunch of perfect people who are coming together, each with their own problem in the world to solve. And these are all going to be super pressing, important problems like climate change and public health and community building and education and treating addiction. These are all going to be just amazing, important problems. Now, because we're talking about nudging, we're imagining each of these organizations has their own nudge unit that is trying to identify specific behaviors that are pro-social, pro-health, good behaviors for people to adopt. And when I think of all the possible wonderful behaviors to promote, there are so many. I mean, we're thinking recycling, brushing your teeth, cutting back on alcohol, eating more vegetables, meditating, volunteering at the local food network, volunteering at the homeless shelter, doing deep work to promote creative energy. There are just so many behaviors you could promote that might fall under one of these categories of helping people with their own health or helping people just do better things for the world. And one of the problems here, at least the first problem that I'm running across in doing this thought experiment, is that when I try to imagine the huge list of things we all should be doing, like learning all the life hacks on how to cook correctly or whatever, that list is just overwhelming. I think about the possibility that I might have to do that or that I might be nudged to that huge list of things. And I'm like, I'm not a perfect person. I don't want to be a perfect person. That just sounds overwhelming. In which case, there could be some really good positive behaviors to nudge me toward that are honestly not worth it when we look at the huge list of things that could be nudged toward. And yet, if people inside these organizations are each looking at one individual behavior, like getting you to lift weights or exercise, any one of those behaviors might be a positive value thing to try to nudge people toward. And then I continued the thought experiment, and I realized that these nudge units and these overall organizations would need to be held accountable, or certainly they would be held accountable. And how do you hold organizations accountable? It's through measurable behavior changes. And accountability and measurability is actually its whole thing, and I have some critiques there, but that's not for this video. What I'm saying here is these organizations are going to try to nudge people towards specific behaviors. They'll measure those specific behaviors, and they will test out different nudging techniques to figure out what works best to increase this behavior in the population. Well, here's the problem with that. The most effective way of getting people to change behavior is almost always going to be to scare them or to increase anxiety or to increase fear of shame. It's going to be to put them in fight or flight mode so that they feel whatever behavior the nudging is trying to promote is so important. Like, positive motivators are much less motivating than negative motivators. If you're trying to promote actual actions, putting people in fight or flight mode is the best way to get people to sort of get up and go. And yet, We don't want people to be in fight or flight mode all the time. We don't want people to experience from many different directions, many different people trying to scare them or shame them into good behavior. And this is where drop in the bucket comes in. If you look at any one of these behaviors, like let's just say exercising, you're trying to nudge the population to exercise more. Well, it's definitely going to be worth the benefit. Okay, we can increase exercise in the population by giving people visual images of all the horrible things that'll happen to them if they don't go out running 3 times a week. Well, that sort of works its way into their nervous system. Eventually, they don't have to think consciously about it. They just sort of know, I need to get up and exercise today because otherwise, and I think that's how nudging is working with social media, is that we develop this sense of fear or anxiety that at one point was associated with some vivid image, but that has become ingrained in our nervous system and our body to get us to do things, basically. And so if you think of like the brain and the nervous system as a pool of resources to tap into, then each one individual trying to nudge positive behavior is tapping into a little bit of that cognitive nervous system energy, but it's doing so through a negative force, through fear or through anxiety or through something that's going to get people into fight or flight mode to motivate them. That's just more effective than the positive motivators. So even if each individual behavior you're trying to nudge is worth the little bit of extra fear or anxiety it's inducing, as a whole, all of those groups coming in and adding a little bit of fear, that amounts to just piling anxiety and piling fear onto the population, such that the total anxiety at the end of all of that nudging is way higher and is not worth the many different behaviors it's trying to change in us. So that's where the tragedy of the commons comes from. It's this pool of cognitive resource that's being tapped into through negative motivators to nudge behavior. Even positive behavior, eventually you're just adding too much anxiety to that pool. Now, there's one more factor here, which is if each of these organizations is just trying to increase recycling, trying to increase meditation, trying to increase time with friends, trying to increase these wonderful behaviors, but they're maximizing and they're not accounting for sort of the full cost benefit of that maximization. It could be that when you maximize recycling, you increase recycling by 10%, but you increase anxiety by 1%. And you have to ask, is that worth it? For a lot of these behaviors, these are just not easy behaviors to change. So maximizing meditation in the population might increase meditation 1% or 0.01%. And maybe that's a good thing, but if you're using negative motivators to get there, then you may not actually have that much total positive behavior change. And the cost of that is adding to people's sense of fear and worry about what could happen to them if they don't behave properly or behave in a healthy way in their lives. So this is just one worry about nudging that I have, is that it's going to end up causing anxiety even if we're doing it really well, particularly if we're trying to solve many different problems with nudging.